We're taking a deep dive into finding the perfect guitar lesson for you right here in San Diego.
And this guide you found, it's like the ultimate cheat sheet for navigating all the options.
Right, it's amazing how many choices there are. But before you even look at teachers, this guide says you got to start with, well, you.
Totally. Self-assessment. It's like step one. Got to know where you're starting from.
Exactly. Like they even give these little benchmarks like, can you even play a G chord yet?
Yeah, or like, are bar chords still a total mystery? It's all about figuring out your level.
Which, speaking of, the guide breaks it down into beginner, intermediate, advanced. What are some signs someone might be ready to level up from beginner?
Well, those bar chords we talked about, that's often a big one.
Oh, so it's like a dividing line.
Kind of. It's not just about knowing more chords. It's that bar chords open up a whole different understanding of the fretboard.
Makes sense. You're not just like strumming the same shapes anymore.
Exactly. And then as you go from beginner to intermediate, you might start getting into different picking techniques, maybe even dabbling in scales, experimenting a bit.
So you're fluent in bar chords, jamming with some scales. What bumps you up to advanced then? What does that even mean in the guitar world?
It's like the guide says, fretboard mastery, right? Like you can play anything anywhere. Complex chords, super fast-laid guitar stuff.
Okay, so the dream. But this whole time I've been picturing someone alone in their room with a guitar. This guy also talks about all the different learning environments in San Diego.
Yeah, and how it matches your personality to them. Someone who wants that one-on-one attention, they might love in-home private lessons.
Makes sense if you have a busy schedule or just like that comfortable setting. But what about people who want to learn with others?
That's where those group classes come in. The guide highlights that social element, jamming with other people.
I can see how that'd be motivating, feeding off that energy. Plus, group classes are usually easier on the wallet, which the guide mentions too.
For sure. It says they can be a lot more affordable than private lessons.
Definitely a factor for a lot of people. But the guide doesn't leave you hanging. It actually gives average costs.
Super helpful, right? Like knowing what to expect.
So let's break it down just so people have those numbers. In-home private lessons we're looking at.
Usually somewhere between $50 to over $100 per hour, depending on the teacher, location, all that.
So you're paying for that focus time. What about group classes, since they're usually cheaper?
Guide says those are more like $25 to $40 per hour on average.
Big difference. It's like choosing between a fancy coffee shop and making your own at home. Both good. Just depends what you want.
Love that comparison. And speaking of different options, can't forget online lessons, right?
Oh, true. Which the guide even mentions their cost too.
Yeah, it says they're usually around $40 to $80 an hour.
So somewhere in between the other two.
Yeah.
Interesting. But before we get into the pros and cons, how do you even find a good online teacher? Seems tricky.
It's a whole different thing. The guide has tips. Still got to look for someone with experience in what you want to play, and importantly, someone who seems like a good fit personality-wise.
Even though it's online, you still want to click with them. But how can you tell without meeting in person?
That's where clear communication comes in, and the guide talks about that a lot. It says, ask the teacher about how they teach, how they plan lessons, even how they prefer to communicate outside of the actual lessons.
Setting those expectations early on, so you're not hoping for feedback every day if they're more hands-off.
Exactly. And the guide says communication goes both ways. You got to be upfront about your level, your goals, how fast you want to learn.
Honesty from both sides.
Yeah.
Like a two-way street, that teacher-student thing.
For sure. Oh, and before we move on from the different learning styles, the guide also talks about dedicated music schools.
Right. What makes them different from a group class at, like, a community center?
Music schools are usually way more structured. They have teachers with tons of experience, sometimes even degrees in music.
So it's like the difference between a casual cooking class and going to culinary school. Both good, just depends how deep you want to go.
And the guide mentions that deeper dive usually comes with a higher price tag, too.
How much are we talking?
It says music schools are usually upwards of $200 per month, maybe even more with extra fees for applications and stuff.
Wow. Okay, so a bigger commitment. So we've got all these options. Private, group, online, music schools, each with pros and cons. Seems like the best choice depends on a bunch of things.
For sure. Your budget, your schedule, how you like to learn. And that's where this guide is awesome. It's not just giving you a list, it's making you think about what actually works for you.
Which brings us back to those goals we keep mentioning. We talked about your skill level, the different ways to learn. But what about the why? Why even learn guitar in the first place?
Now this is where it gets cool, because the guide doesn't just say set goals. It goes deep on what those goals could actually be, depending on your level.
Oh, so a beginner's goals are going to look different from, say, someone who's been playing a while.
Totally. If you're just starting out, your goal might be learning those basic chords, changing between them smoothly, maybe playing a simple song all the way through.
Which, let's be real, those are still huge milestones when you're a beginner.
Totally. And those small goals build up to the bigger stuff. Like maybe once you know those chords, your goal becomes learning that one song that made you want to play guitar in the first place.
Oh, I love that, having those songs in your back pocket. What about for the more experienced players? What do their goals look like, according to the guide?
They might be aiming for a specific technique, like fingerstyle or slide guitar. Or maybe they want to learn a whole new genre, like jazz or flamenco.
It's like that leveling up thing we talked about, always looking for a new challenge.
Exactly. And the guide says those goals will change as you get better. What seemed impossible at the beginning becomes second nature, and new doors open up.
So how do you go from, I want to learn guitar, to actual goals you can work towards? It's got to feel overwhelming at first.
One thing the guide stresses is figuring out who you listen to, what bands, what guitarists.
Oh, because that tells you what style you're naturally drawn to.
Yeah. It also says to think about your dream musical future. Band. Writing songs. Just playing for friends.
Like painting a picture of yourself as a guitarist, then figuring out how to get there.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to write those goals down, revisit them, change them up. It's all part of the journey.
Not like a set-in-stone thing, more like a guide as you learn.
Exactly.
It's like a roadmap, but not to one place.
Yeah.
More like a roadmap to becoming the guitarist you want to be.
Yeah.
But okay, let's say you've got those goals. You figured out your ideal teacher. You're ready to jam. What about the actual gear? The guide mentions that too.
It does. And it's cool that it doesn't assume you know everything already. You know, like it has a whole section on the essential gear, and it starts with the most important thing, the guitar itself.
Which seems obvious, but there are so many types.
Right.
What does it say about picking the right one? Especially for beginners who are probably overwhelmed by all the options.
It says comfort is key. Find one that feels good in your hands, easy to play, and of course fits your budget. It even suggests going to a music store and actually trying some out before you buy.
That makes sense, because if it feels good, you're more likely to actually pick it up and practice. Okay, what else is on the essential gear list?
Picks. It recommends getting a good set, different thicknesses, because they change your tone and how it feels to play. Oh, and definitely spare strings. Trust me, you don't want to be caught without them when one breaks.
Ugh, the worst timing, right? Like a musical emergency. Speaking of which, the guide also mentions a tuner. Yeah.
Yes, super important, especially when you're still learning. It stresses how crucial playing in tune is. It even suggests getting one with a visual display so you can actually see it.
So much easier when you're starting out, not having to rely on your ear alone. Anything else in the essential gear recommendations?
You know what it also mentions? Having a notebook and a folder might seem kind of old school now, but there's something about physically writing down the chords, the strumming patterns, even just ideas. It helps you remember them better.
Oh, like a guitar journal, to keep track of your progress.
Totally. And as you get better, you can look back and see how far you've come.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this guide, what are some final takeaways for all those future guitar heroes out there?
The guide ends on a really positive note, saying that learning any new skill, especially something as complex as guitar, takes time, dedication, and you gotta be kind to yourself.
Be patient with the process, the ups and downs, those moments where you feel stuck.
Yeah. Celebrate the small wins, like getting a chord change down or finally playing for someone else for the first time.
Because even a tiny step is still progress.
Exactly. And lastly, don't forget to actually enjoy it. Don't get so focused on the technical stuff that you forget to have fun and just play the music.
Because ultimately, that's what it's all about.
Right.
Expressing yourself, connecting with people, letting the music flow. And hey, maybe you'll inspire someone else to start their own guitar journey.
Wouldn't that be something?
It would. Okay, before we go, one last thought from the guide. It talks about picking 2 or 3 styles to focus on. But what if you went even further? What if you mixed those styles together, created something totally new? What kind of musical fusion could you bring to life? Keep that creative spark alive as you start playing. And remember, the world is waiting to hear your music. It's like a roadmap, but instead of a place, it's leading you to the guitarist you want to be. So you've got your goals, found the perfect teacher, you're ready to rock. What about the actual gear? The guide talks about that too, right?
It does, and it's great that it doesn't assume everyone's an expert already. Like, there's a whole section on the must-have gear, starting with the most obvious but important, the guitar.
Yeah, seems obvious, but there's so many. What's the guide's advice for picking the right one? Especially for beginners, it's got to be overwhelming.
Comfort is key. Find one that feels good to hold, easy to play, and, fits your budget. It even says, go to a music store, try some out before committing.
Makes sense. Because if it feels good, you're going to want to actually play it. Okay, what else is on the essential gear list?
Picks. You want a good set, different thicknesses, they change how it sounds and feels to play. Oh, and spare strings, for sure. You do not want to be stuck without those when one breaks.
Yeah, always at the worst time. Speaking of, a tuner is on that list too, right?
Definitely. Especially when you're learning, playing in tune is so crucial.
Yeah.
It even suggests getting one with a visual display so you can see it.
Way easier when you're starting out, not having to just rely on your ear. Anything else gear-wise?
This one might surprise you. A notebook and folder sounds old school, but there's something about actually writing down chords, strumming patterns, even just ideas, helps you remember them.
Oh, like a guitar diary. Documenting your journey.
Exactly. Then later, you can look back and see how far you've come.
I love that. Okay, as we wrap up our deep dive into this awesome guide, any last words of wisdom for those aspiring guitarists listening?
The guide ends on a really encouraging note. It reminds you, learning anything new, especially something as hard as guitar, takes time, dedication, and you got to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, enjoy the journey, even the tough parts. Those aha moments, make it worth it.
Totally. Celebrate the small victories, like finally nailing a chord change or playing for someone for the first time.
Because a win's a win, no matter how small.
Exactly. And most importantly, remember to have fun with it. Don't get so caught up in the technical stuff that you forget to actually enjoy the music.
That's what it's all about, right? Self-expression, connecting with people through music, letting it flow, and who knows, maybe someday you'll be the one inspiring others to start their musical journey.
That's the dream right there.
It is. Okay, one final thought before we go. The guide talks about finding 2-3 styles to focus on. But what if you went even further? Mix those styles, made something totally new, your own thing. What kind of music could you create? Hold on to that creativity as you start playing. And remember, the world wants to hear what you come up with.